Send in your stories to astheravendreams.com. Hello, new submitter here, but I had something happen to me last year that I wanted to share. I'm a 28-year-old woman, 27 at the time of this story, and live in a mid-sized city in the Midwest. My apartment complex wasn't really in a dangerous neighborhood per se, but not exactly the safest either. I say not the safest because we have had reports of break-ins, both homes and cars, but nothing violent. We just all knew not to leave anything unlocked or show off any valuables. My apartment complex specifically, though, had not had any break-ins, so I wasn't really worried about it happening. But I did still keep everything locked. You can't be too careful. I do live alone, beside my little 4-year-old border collie mix named Polly. My nephew named him. He was still young and full of energy, so we went for walks daily, or rather nightly. Because of my work schedule, our walks almost always happened late at night. I know it probably wasn't the smartest choice, but like I said, the worst crimes were break-ins, not personal robberies. I'd also been walking at night for a few years without any real problems, so I didn't feel unsafe. This night was no different, and we went for our normal walk around 10 p.m. I'm a creature of habit, so we always took the same route. I went down my street, left at the end, through a small dog park with a friendly trail, and then a big loop through the residential streets before heading home. The whole thing took about 45 minutes, and it was a peaceful walk. There were very few people around at that time. Maybe someone here or there walking or standing outside of a building smoking, but that was about it. Usually I'll put my earbuds in and just decompress from whatever stress work has thrown at me. At one point in my walks, I started noticing this car on our route. I'm not great with car models, but it was a beat-up sedan, maybe late 90s or early 2000s, in a dark blue or black color. I passed by from the back and could see a large dent in the rear bumper and a spiderweb crack on the passenger side of the windshield. At first, it seemed like a normal car. It was parked on the side of the street in front of a home, and I had no reason to think anything further about it, other than being someone's car that lived nearby or was visiting someone that did. I really only made note of it because I walked on that side of the street. And since there was no sidewalk there, I had to walk along the side of the street. And with that car there, I had to walk around it. I kept seeing this car as we continued our walks, but it was in a similar place on that same street. I thought it was a little curious that all the houses along that street had driveways and they were never full, so I wondered why they weren't in the driveway. But then, I also noticed that it wasn't in the same place. It was parked in random places on that same road, which was weird to me. I remember one time I tried to look to see if anyone was in it as I passed by, but the windows must have been tinted because I couldn't see inside. It was also just as I walked by, so I didn't stop to look or press my face against the car, meaning I didn't try very hard, so I couldn't tell. But then, there was one night that I walked past it, and once I was in front of it, the headlights kicked on. I couldn't hear the motor, so it was pretty clearly off, but the lights were definitely there. As it got brighter in front of me, casting my shadow straight ahead, I turned around to see if someone may have been walking to the car, but no one ever did. There was no one around, and after a few seconds, the lights turned back off. Again, weird, and it startled me, if I'm being honest, but nothing else happened and we continued our walk. It was about 2 weeks later when this event actually happened. Clearly, this car had been there for a while with nothing happening, so I had no reason to change my routine. Again, we went for our walk, and after a specifically rough day, I just wanted to zone out and listen to the crickets chirp, so I left my earbuds at home. The walk started out normal. We made our usual loop through the park. Polly seemed to be more anxious after a while, stopping to look around for every little sound, which unfortunately did make me more irritable. Then we turned on that street and I saw the car in the usual spot. And for some reason, this time I was hesitant. I got that sense of being watched, and it just felt different. I had no idea why. I wrapped Polly's leash around my wrist a second time to bring him in closer, and kept my hand in my jacket pocket, holding my phone. But this time, as we walked by the car, I could actually see movement inside. It was just a shadow, but I could see the shape of a person moving in the driver's seat. I looked forward again and continued to walk straight ahead, just wanting to get off that road and get back home. That's when the headlights kicked in again, but it was followed by the sound of the engine turning over. My heart immediately started racing, and again, I don't know why. So, someone was in the car, but it's not like they had done anything wrong. But something was telling me that I needed to get out of there. It didn't help seeing how tense Polly was acting either. I've always been told that animals pick up on danger faster and quicker than humans, and it reminded me how the walk started with him on edge, validating my fears at that moment. I picked up my pace, and Polly stayed right at my heels. Then, I heard the car start rolling. I glanced back and saw it moving straight ahead, slowly. I told myself that they were just leaving and that they would pass by soon, but they never did. I could still hear the tires on the road, but they never passed. I looked back once more and saw that it was now closer, but still hadn't sped up. I started to panic a bit more. Were they purposefully following me? I started running through my options. The street that I was on was all residential, so no businesses, and certainly not any open at that hour. And no people were around, and there were barely any streetlights. If something were to happen, would anyone even respond to me screaming for help or banging on their door? Would I have enough time to call 911? I thought about my route ahead. If I continued straight, I would eventually hit the next street, which had better lighting and a better chance of traffic, but that was still 4 or 5 blocks away. As I was looking around and weighing my options, the car finally sped up and was now rolling along beside me. I looked over and both driver's side windows rolled down. From a quick glance, I could see 3 guys in the car. The one in the back seat asked me if I wanted a ride, and they all started laughing, putting me even more on edge. They started to say something else, something about me not responding to them, but I was ignoring them, trying to figure out how to get out of this situation. That is when I remembered there was a shortcut. About a block ahead, there was an intersection with another street, but the other one was a dead end for cars. There was a pedestrian path at the end to cut through to the other street, which was always busy. It was well lit, and it had a bar and grill that was open late. I didn't waste any time. I started walking faster, noticing the car picked up its speed too. I started turning like I was going to cross in front of the car, and then zipped around and took off running to the left. I still had a hold of Polly's leash, and bless him, but he kept up perfectly, with his leash barely even going taut. I could hear them shouting at me from the car, and the car accelerating. I didn't look back and just focused on the end of the street. I was a pretty average size. I wasn't exactly skinny, and I went on these nightly walks, but I rarely ran like I did that night. My lungs were burning. I stopped when I reached the small pedestrian path, scooped Polly up in my arms and carried him through the narrow, barely 4 feet wide path. I heard the car stop and they continued to shout things at me that I don't care to repeat here. I was worried that they would try to follow me on foot, but surprisingly, they didn't. I popped through to the other side, walked down to the bar, and stood close to 2 older ladies and a man. I didn't want to bother them, but I also didn't want to look alone. They didn't really seem to pay much attention to me either, until they heard Polly whimpering. I pulled out my phone and called 911 because it still needed to be reported that those guys were clearly following me. I only kicked myself a few times for never thinking about looking at or memorizing a license plate. I told them what happened, and they said they would send someone to the bar that I was at to talk with me further. They apparently already had an officer in the area because they pulled up before I even got off the phone with them. I told her what happened, and she said that someone else was over on the other side patrolling to see if they could spot the car. And they never did. She did give me a ride home, though, which also relieved a lot of stress. I was pretty worried about having to walk home after all that. Once back home, she explained that she would contact me personally if they had any updates, and also told me to not hesitate on calling them if I saw this car again. Thankfully, I never did. I didn't walk that path for the longest time, fearing that I might run into them a second time, but I took it during the day with my now boyfriend and the car was not there. I'm still curious if they were there for someone, or really why they were there in the first place. All I know is that was the worst thing that has ever happened to me since I've been living there. And if that's the only thing that ever does happen, that would be fine by me. I used to work overnights in a small medical billing office about 3 years ago. My schedule was usually around 6 p.m. to 2 a.m., sometimes shifting a little earlier or later depending on need. The job itself was mind-numbingly boring. I spent most nights scanning medical documents and entering the data into our system. Very entry-level, but it got me to a better position for decent money, especially with that bonus since I worked overnight. I didn't have much of a social life and found myself up late anyways, so I figured doing something useful with my time would be better, and it gave me time during the day to do my normal errands. During the day, there were about 15 employees, but at night, the only other person that worked that late was a guy who processed insurance claims that left around 10 p.m., and then the janitor that came through to clean and sanitize everything. The building itself was an old house that the owner had bought and converted into office space. It really was a nice little 2-story building, and everyone worked pretty close together. But there was one night that had me pretty spooked, and I still can't make heads or tails of it. I came in at my usual time and noticed that the other late night guy, I'll call him Steve, was not in. I expected this, however, as he had recently mentioned taking some time off, so I was alone. It was around midnight. I had my headphones in and was mindlessly entering data when I heard what sounded like footsteps in the hallway. Like I said, it wasn't entirely unusual as we had our maintenance guy / janitor that also worked overnight. I'll call him Mike. I had my own office, so he usually fixed up what he needed and sanitized, and I let him be. Sometimes we would have a short conversation in passing if I ran to the restroom or got something to drink, but that was about it. Now, one thing about Mike, he was an older gentleman and was very much the type that had a pattern. When he worked, he came in, hung his coat in the closet, grabbed his cart with his supplies, and whistled the same song. I still don't know what the song was, but I think it was some kind of gospel song, based on the very few lyrics that he sang. He always came in early because he would wheel his cart right outside the break room, and make a pot of coffee and read the newspaper before getting to work. I could smell the coffee when he made it and would occasionally make myself a cup. Sometimes he would even stop by and tell me he made some, which got me up to stretch anyways. So, back to that night. I heard the footsteps and assumed that it was Mike, and thought nothing else of it. But after about half an hour, I didn't hear his whistling and nor could I smell the coffee. I remember pausing my music and looking at my door to see if I could see him, but I didn't. However, I could still hear footsteps. I stayed in my office for a while longer. When I still had no sign of Mike, I thought I would go check the break room myself. I walked in, and it was empty. The coffee maker was cold. Strange, but maybe something was going on, so I just went back to work. Shortly after I returned, I started hearing footsteps again. But it wasn't just the footsteps. Now I was hearing what sounded like something being dragged across the floor. It was a pretty frequent stomp, drag. Over and over. Like someone was dragging something around that was pretty heavy. So I leaned over my desk and this time called out, "Mike? Is that you?" And all the sound stopped. That is when it started getting creepy. The only person that would be there so late would be Mike, but his whole routine was missing, and he wasn't responding to me. Then, I did the thing that you never do in scary movies. I went to check it out once more. I was worried that maybe it really was Mike and that something was wrong. Or worse, it was someone who shouldn't have been there. I walked out of my office and around the corner to the hallway. At the other end of the short hallway was a more open area with a few cubes where the front door was. I followed the sound down the hall and turned the corner, and was certain that I was not looking at Mike. In front of me was a very tall and lanky person. They were facing away from me, but yet their knees were facing outward to the side, like they were bow-legged. But the movement seemed so unnatural, it was janky or twitchy. It was like watching a buffering video, but it was happening right in front of me. To make it all worse, they were dragging something behind them, but it was more like a pile. There was no defined shape really, but it was covered by a blanket and then tied multiple times with some kind of rope, which was then being held by this, I guess, person over their shoulder. This explained the footsteps followed by the sound of dragging. I don't know why I did this, but part of me felt responsible. The building had normal locks on the door. No key cards or anything like that, so we just made sure the door was locked, especially at night. I was worried that maybe I left the door unlocked and that was how they got in. I called out, "Who are you?" The person stopped walking, slowly turned around, held a long crooked finger to his mouth and made a shushing sound. Something in that moment kicked in my fight or flight, and even being a full-grown man, that man towered over me. I ran back the way I came and left through the back emergency door. I knew when to pick my battles, and that was not one. I didn't have anything on me except my phone, so I couldn't even get into my car. I stood in the back parking lot and called 911. When they arrived, they searched the building, came out, and told me it was clear. I went in and explained what I saw again, and they took a statement. While I waited for them to clear the area, I had called my boss to report it as well. He showed up while we were inside giving my statement. Following the hallway, we found a pack of popcorn on the floor. It was strange because it was still wrapped up and unpopped. It was like it was dropped. We didn't have cash there, but the most valuable items were probably the paperwork containing sensitive data or the computers themselves. But none of them had even been touched. So what were they doing and what were they dragging behind them? After finding the popcorn, another officer checked the break rooms, and we were surprised and confused about what we found. They had cleaned out everything that was in there. Snacks, drinks, coffee pods, even the random food containers in the fridge were gone. The only thing that remained was a circle drawn on the counter with a dark, sticky substance, like a barbecue sauce, with a small bird skull in the center. According to the officer, it was a fake skull. Still, it looked pretty creepy, and we had no idea what it meant or why it was there. I had even walked in the break room on the bottom floor, where I was, and it wasn't there at the time. The cops wondered if maybe the person we saw had stolen the food and maybe they were under the influence of something, which would explain the way they were acting. My boss did file a report since we deal with sensitive information, and he contacted Mike to make sure he was okay. He was. He said that he was actually feeling ill and wasn't going to be at work that night. Part of me was relieved because him being older, I was worried what could have happened if he ran into that strange man. As far as I know, they still have no idea who that guy was and what the circle and skull meant. They never found or caught that guy, and I stopped working there about a year later. I was pretty creeped out that night, especially when I heard the door open, but you can bet your ass I never forgot to check the door either. I just wish, if they were looking for food, they would have asked for it, or at least taken it in a much less creepy way. Hey Raven. So, when I was 19, my boyfriend and his friends were really into motorcycles. They weren't the most financially responsible, but they absolutely loved riding. We lived in Southwest Florida at the time, and my boyfriend had found a listing for a new bike that he wanted to buy in Miami. We packed up my parents' Subaru Outback and drove across town to pick up his best friend, who we'll call Bobby, which I wasn't super excited about since he and I didn't get along very well. As anyone who lives in Southwest Florida knows, the quickest way to get to Miami is by Alligator Alley, a long road that goes straight through the Everglades. For being such a main road, it almost feels strangely desolate at times. So, that day, after my boyfriend successfully bought the motorcycle and we spent the evening in Miami test riding it, it was time to make the 3-hour drive home. Bobby and I took the Subaru while my boyfriend rode on the motorcycle alone since I forgot my earbuds and I didn't really want to sit in the wind on the back of the bike all the way home. Still, I wasn't really looking forward to spending 3 hours in the car with Bobby either. We didn't necessarily hate each other, but it did feel like a sibling rivalry at times. We began the long trek out of Miami and into the dark and desolate highway that is Alligator Alley at night. There's one gas station on that road, which feels like it's in the middle of nowhere, but it's on the Native American reservation grounds and sits on the canal that Alligator Alley runs along. We decided to stop and fill up our gas and regroup with my boyfriend to chat about who we would drop off at home first when we got back in town. It was late at night already, and the gas station was in the process of closing as we got there, so we were the last customers. As we sat and ate snacks before finishing the drive home, the gas station employees drove home and the lights turned off, leaving us in darkness other than our car headlights. My boyfriend started to pack up his gear, and we said that we would meet him on the road as we packed up as well. Knowing that he would want to test the speed of his new bike, as expected, his taillights disappeared into the distance by the time we got into the car. Bobby went to crank the keys, and the engine sputtered and died. He tried again. Nothing. Oh no. We checked our phones. No signal. We were really in the middle of nowhere. We stepped out of the car in the dark, and I shined my flashlight around, and a pair of eyes glinted back at me from the canal. Grunting and snorting sounds bubbled up from the water. That's when I remembered that it was alligator mating season, so they were more aggressive than usual, and we were deserted in the middle of the night with no cell service. Just us and the alligators. There were 3 of them from what we could see from where we stood, not wanting to get too close to the canal as they just floated there watching us. We needed to get out of there. Lights started approaching in the distance. "Bobby, there's a car," I yelled, and I ran to the shoulder of the road, sticking my thumb out. This was 2020. No one was stopping for hitchhikers or helping anyone. 3 more cars passed within the hour that we sat there, all of them ignoring my waving hand and outstretched thumb. Our last hope was how Bobby explained he knew of Native American reservations about a 2 hours walk ahead. But he was very sure strangers arriving in the middle of the night were definitely not going to be welcomed, even if we appeared to just be some kids. I feel bad for this now, but the way he explained that it's a tight-knit and guarded community, and being a naive and scared 19-year-old girl, knowing we were in deep southern rural Florida, I imagined being greeted by an angry man with a rifle at their gates. Despite this worry, we set off on foot along the shoulder of the highway. Our phones had already died at this point from the flashlight draining the battery, so we were only guided by moonlight, occasionally hearing the grunting of the gators in the canal below. After about an hour and a half of trekking through whatever lies on the side of the highway, I couldn't believe my eyes. Up ahead, it seemed like there was a cop car. No lights were on, but the way it was positioned on the shoulder, and by its shape and the white color, I hoped that it was one. Bobby worried out loud that it was an empty one parked on the road to scare people to slow them down, but my hope prevailed. We approached it and knocked on the window, and to our surprise, and to hers as well, I'm sure, a lady rolled down the window. She asked us what we were doing out here. We explained how our car broke down at the gas station. She seemed suspicious of us at first and didn't seem to want to help us. She said that there wasn't a nearby gas station, and we explained that we had already been walking over an hour. She rolled her window back up to talk to someone on her radio, and I wondered what else we could even do if she was unwilling to help. After about 10 minutes, she rolled the window back down and told us to step into the back of the car. It was unnerving riding in the back of a cop car, especially with how suspicious of us she seemed until she pulled up to the gas station, and indeed, there sat the Subaru. She was able to help us jumpstart it and made sure that we got on our way. I was thankful that she helped us, but could not shake the creepy feeling of the dark and the gators watching us, waiting for one of us to just slip all night long. So that, my friends, was a collection of some late night horror stories. Scary stories that happen after the sun goes down. This video did not have a hook. I understand that may be confusing, as I said I was going to do that, but not for this one. We're still in the testing phases of things. I know you guys probably know that by now. I do a lot of strange testing on things, see what changes in my numbers, and for right now, we're still in testing phases, so let's go ahead and just keep that, and I'll do it next time, maybe. What am I talking about? I don't know. Anyways, hopefully you all enjoyed this collection of stories. That'd be fantastic if you did. And if you did, would you consider hitting that like button? That'd be tremendous of you. I'd appreciate that. You can also subscribe if you're new to the channel and liked what you heard. You can also join Patreon or memberships to get early access to content like this and other things depending on what you sign up for and how you sign up. You can also send your stories in to astheravendreams.com or go to that same website and find where all of my social media pages are, all of my podcast pages are. That's what I'm looking for. The word podcast was eluding me for some reason. Yeah, find where the podcast is on the website, as well as other stories I've written and submit stories. I already said those. Whatever. If you want to. Yeah. All that said, I hope you're having a beautiful week so far. And hope I see you again here very soon. But until then, please remember that you are loved, that you are valid, that you are important. You're the best you that you can be. Don't forget it. Until next time, my friends, Much love, and sleep well.